They're just out-and-out sick people, I mean, and they're trying to make everyone else around them who listens to their music as sick as they are.
Hello and welcome to another Bad Movie Review. This time we're looking at Trick or Treat. This is a 1986 film, runs about an hour and 38 minutes and rated R. Directed by Charles Martin Smith. This one opens with Eddie Ragman Weinbauer. He is a bullied and abused heavy metal fan, definitely a loner type that only has really one friend and is largely outcast and a dork. His hero and local alumni is Sammi Curr. Sammy's a heavy metal superstar and controversial figure. Unfortunately, at the beginning of the movie, Eddie finds out that Sammy was killed in a hotel fire. Around this time, we meet a local DJ named Nuke, played by Gene Simmons. Apparently, Nuke knew Sammy a little bit. They're probably about the same age in the film. And he said how Sammy was always a very angry person and really not somebody to be idolized. So he's trying to talk Eddie down from his hero worship, but it doesn't really work. But Nuke does give Eddie the only existing record of the last recordings of Sammi Curr. It was an unreleased album that Nuke intends to play on Halloween night as a tribute to Sammy. Now, Nuke had made a recording of the album already, so he gives the original record to Eddie as a sort of memento, saying, you know, he'd probably want his biggest fan to have this. And we did learn that Sammy had tried to do a concert at the local high school where he was originally attending as a kid, and they turned him down, probably because of his controversies and the satanic panic, metal panic of the era. This definitely has a feel of exploiting the controversy around heavy metal and rock and roll that was rampant in the 80s, so they kind of play that up, and in some ways it's kind of funny, especially if you knew the moral panic at the time, but they really lean into that. So Eddie gets invited to this pool party that's sort of like an underground rave thing at the high school that nobody's supposed to go to by this girl that he likes named Leslie. And Leslie obviously has some feelings for him, or, you know, a developing feelings for him. But unfortunately, Eddie's arch nemesis Tim is there as well with his girlfriend and his minions because Tim is the local bully. So Eddie gets tossed in the water and Leslie has to save him, leading to more humiliation on Eddie's part, and he thinks he's been set up by her, so he immediately goes home and listens to Sammy's recording, which is labeled as King of Death. He quickly realizes that there is a hidden message by playing the record backwards, and it's referenced later that Sammy had been known to do this with other albums as well, and that was a thing that was popular at the time where a lot of the moral crusaders were saying how there were demonic messages that you could hear if you played the album backwards, which was almost certainly audio pareidolia 99.9% of the time. So I don't know why this guy Sammy thinks that some backwater area of North Carolina is the perfect place to have his resurgence as a spirit demon thing, but you know, whatever. Well, we get a goofy chase scene at the high school when Eddie starts to fight back because of something he heard on the album. There is a scene where they knock over the janitor's mop and bucket, but the janitor's standing right next to that with a mop in his hands. Why does he have two mops for one janitor? I thought that was kind of weird. So Eddie quickly believes that the backward playing message is strictly for him, and he starts talking to his record player, and it starts talking back, and that's a little weird. So he starts communicating with Sammy. Eddie's mom accidentally wanders into his room at one point, and we learn that she is terrified by guitar solos, much the same weakness that we saw in Back to the Future with Marty's dad. Like, guitar riffs are just terrifying to a certain generation of people, I guess. And also we learn that she doesn't know how power buttons work, so she's just smacking at the stereo trying to make it stop instead of pressing that button labeled power. So she's not the sharpest. And then Eddie records a tape cassette based on what the record is doing for his arch nemesis Tim as a peace offering. And unfortunately, Tim's girlfriend Jeannie, spelled Genie for some reason, plays the tape tape and ends up in the hospital. Well, Tim quickly figures out that something funny's going on because he connects that tape to what's going on real easily. It's pretty obvious. And she played it when he went for a pee, so that's kind of on him. They were fooling around and he's like, I gotta take a leak, and she plays the tape. So that's kind of on Tim for not securing mystery tape cassettes in an appropriate fashion. And this is around the time we see Ozzy Osbourne's cinematic debut as Reverend Aaron Gilstrom, a televangelist. And Ozzy's scenes are pretty funny. They're very much aimed at poking fun at the moral crusading that had been going on with the Satanic Panic and all the things encompassing that. He was absolutely mocking that with the scenes in here, as well as Alice Nunn, who plays another evangelical type. And Alice Nunn, for those of you that remember fun movies, will recognize her as Large Marge from Pee-wee's Big Adventure. Anyway, Eddie's stereo starts to take on a life of its own. A hideous face appears on it, and all sorts of shenanigans ensue as Sammi tries to manifest himself in this sort of electrical form that's very reminiscent of a movie that would come a couple years later called Shocker, which I reviewed previously with Mitch Pileggi, and that's a Wes Craven cinema classic. But the idea is kind of in several movies where beings can manifest through electricity. So I don't think this was the first movie to use that idea, but it did work pretty well for what they were trying to accomplish with this film. So Eddie tries to rebel against what Sammi's doing, but Sammi recruits another person and things go horribly wrong at the Halloween dance. And it's up to Eddie and Leslie to try and put a stop to that, as well as the midnight broadcast at the radio station. So overall, the pacing is really good here. There is some pretty good elements as well. The story is a bit thin at times, where there's sort of leaps in logic, but overall, I can see why this is a cult classic. It's very goofy, and if you grew up in the 80s, especially as a heavy metal fan in the 80s or 90s, you understand the moral panic and fear-mongering that was going on around heavy metal with all its supposedly demonic storylines and the shock value of album covers and the so-called satanic messaging, etc. So there's definitely some of that here too that a lot of people have nostalgia for. There are a few flaws. The actor that plays Sammi, which is Tony Fields, is clearly lip syncing at one point when he's doing a concert scene, and it's kind of hard to hide. I don't necessarily blame the actor for that, but it's just very poorly synced up, and it's pretty obvious he's lip syncing. Now, a lot of these actors have been in other things. Of course, Mark Price, who plays Eddie, was best known for playing Skippy on Family Ties. He was also in Killer Tomatoes Eat France. Lisa Orgolini, who plays Leslie, had a fairly short career, unfortunately. She's probably one of the better actors in this film, but it looks like this was her second role, and she really just sort of faded out for some reason, and that's really disappointing. She could have been a good scream queen. Doug Savant, who played Tim, had a really long career. Still does. Still working from the look of it. And it's mostly guest appearances or bit parts on shows, but I think if you're going to recognize him, it'll probably be from Godzilla 1998, where he played Sergeant O'Neill, and Desperate Housewives, where he was on 175 episodes. Of course, Gene Simmons is best known as Kiss, but his appearance in the movie Runaway is phenomenal, and he does a really good job here too, even though he has a fairly small part. I thought he did a great job. And I think overall, most of the actors did a pretty good job. It's a pretty average, mid-range movie for its time, and it really didn't get the recognition it deserved until it came out on home video. But considering its budget was around $3 million and it grossed about $7 million from what I could tell, I would say it's a pretty good turnaround. This was put out by De Laurentiis Entertainment, which generally did some kind of mid-range to low-end releases, but a lot of those are really well-regarded films, and this one isn't much different. For an 80s film, this one definitely has a lot of really fun parts and a really funny post-credit scene as well. There's not a lot of continuity problems on here, but there are a few. Like when Leslie's counting down, she's supposed to count to 100. She starts off with like the 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, and immediately drops that when she gets to later numbers. So I guess she got bored of doing that, or they forgot. And there's a Pepsi can that vanishes after it gets knocked over and spills onto the record player. Like a scene later, that can is just gone, and so is the soda as well. And when Eddie's mom is in his room, she picks up some records and the top record cover changes. So little things like that throughout the movie that are worth noting for those of you that like to track that. All in all though, I think this was actually a really fun film. It's not particularly scary, and there are some pretty funny scenes in it. The majority of the deaths, of which I counted 13, happen near the end of the film. So the last 30 to 40 minutes is when the killing really starts, and most of it is very quick and not particularly gory. There are 2 plots in here that I noticed, and one manly tailgate that happened early on, and I use the word manly very loosely. So there's not a whole lot of nudity. The body count seems high, but again, most of those happen much later in the movie and largely all at once. So it's more of a slow burn film, kind of like Carrie in that regard, but overall I was pretty entertained with it. It has a lot of similarity in my mind to 976 Evil for the way it's structured, and not necessarily the plot per se, but there are some kind of parallels to it in the way it develops the storyline, but the ending is obviously very, very different. So if you kind of took elements of 976 Evil and Shocker, you would get some similarities to Trick or Treat. So it will definitely have a feeling of familiarity if you've already seen those films, but both of those films came out after this one. So some interesting elements, and it's just a largely fun popcorn film. Not scary, but definitely was playing on the fears and paranoia in a cheeky way of the time of the Satanic Panic. So if you get a chance to check it out and you're a B-movie fan, I think this is a good one to add to your collection. It's definitely a cult film that is really well regarded overall, but probably not the most terrifying thing you're ever going to see. It's just a good popcorn film to hang out to and listen to a pretty fun soundtrack. So a good rock and roll film with a lot of humor. But that's going to do it for this episode. Thank you so much for listening and supporting the channel. If you enjoyed the episode, please hit the like button and don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss future reviews. If you'd like to help the channel out in other ways, links are in the description to various support methods. And as always, we hope to see you on the next one.